Now, as we get started, one of the most deeply held beliefs of mankind is that human beings are the absolute masters of the earth. In our society, many of our practices impact on the lives of animals in a variety of ways. What is our duty as Adventist Christians? We're just figuring out how to use this thing. This is some of their device we had to use, so if we have any problems, bear with us here. And also, as the ones who are watching online, you'll be seeing mostly the pictures, and that is mostly the program. So you won't be seeing me too much, but that's good because the pictures will be mostly what we are dealing with. So now, is there any debt that we owe to the animals, or are we free to ignore the results of our actions? Tonight's presentation will analyze this from the Word of God. Now, there is a text that we as Adventists are very familiar with. In Matthew 5, verse 48, Jesus tells his disciples, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Now, this does not mean that we will be absolutely perfect as God is, but instead will have the same type of character as God. God's motives, values, and way of dealing with us, as shown through the life of Christ, are to be our motives, values, and way of dealing with others. The importance of having this experience is found in Christ's Object Lessons, page 69. When the character of Christ shall be perfectly reproduced in his people, then he will come to claim them as his own. Everything we do should be measured by what Christ would do in the same situation. The character we develop now will be taken unchanged into heaven, only the body will be made new. It doesn't matter if a person dies and is resurrected or is amongst the final generation that lives to see his coming. All will take the character that they've developed here straight to heaven. Maranatha, page 327. Every right principle, every truth learned in an earthly school will advance us just that much in the heavenly school. So it becomes our duty to discover what those right principles are that have been revealed to us. We will focus on one of these principles here tonight. Now, it begins with one of the most famous texts in Scripture. Now, I found that virtually every Christian is familiar with this, as are many non-Christians. This is found in Genesis 1, verse 26. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." This is the text always used to show that whatever we do to the animal creation is accepted and approved by God. It is the divine mandate that justifies any action that we choose. But are we sure, absolutely sure, that we have applied this verse correctly? What is the principle being given here? The answer to that question will determine how we apply that principle, the dominion principle, to our daily lives. Now we're going to go to Colossians 1, verse 16. "For by him, Christ, were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him." Everything in this world was created by and for Christ, including ourselves and everything around us. All of the animals were created for Christ. As Psalms 50, verses 10 to 11 shows, God claims all animal life as his own. "For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine." We cannot own what belongs to God. The most that we can be is caretakers. In Genesis, Christ did not give us ownership. He gave us dominion. So what does the word dominion really mean? To find out, we need to understand what it meant to the original writers and readers of the Bible. In 1 Kings 4, verses 24 to 25, we have the same Hebrew word that we found in Genesis, meaning dominion. Now, this is found, like I said, in Kings. "For he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on all sides round about him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree. Now, King Solomon's dominion is here described as a very positive thing. This is something that sounds very good so far. Further, Psalm 72 is a model of how a good king is to rule over his subjects. And we will start there on verse 2. He shall judge thy people with righteousness, and thy poor with judgment. The mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. He shall judge the poor of the people. He shall save the needy. He save the children of the needy, and shall break in pieces the oppressor. Verse 6. He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass, as showers that water the earth. In his days shall the righteous flourish, an abundance of peace so long as the moon endureth. Now the key verse. He shall have dominion also from sea to sea, and from the river unto the ends of the earth. For he shall deliver the needy when he crieth, and the poor also, and him that hath no helper. He shall spare the poor and needy, and shall save the souls of the needy. He shall redeem their soul from deceit and violence, and precious shall their blood be in his sight. And he shall live, and to him shall be given of the gold of Sheba. Prayer also shall be given unto him continually, and daily shall he be praised. Verse 17, his name shall endure forever. His name shall be continued as long as the sun, and men shall be blessed in him. All nations shall call him blessed. Now, I'm sure that we would agree that any king behaving in this manner is doing everything as he should. He has dominion over his subjects, and they praise him for it. He is blessed. This is a beautiful description of what dominion means to God. Yet there's more to it than that. Verses 4 to 8 are mentioned in Patriarchs and Prophets as a promise given to David, which finds its complete fulfillment in Christ. Christ is to have dominion from sea to sea, from the river unto the ends of the earth. As David says in Psalms 103, verse 19, the Lord hath prepared his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom ruleth over all. Jesus is our King. He has dominion over us in exactly the same way that we have dominion over the animals. To understand how we should exercise our dominion over the animals, we must first understand how he exercises his dominion over us. This is the dominion principle, that God is over us in the same way that we are over the animals. Once we understand this principle, we will have gone a long way toward understanding God's creation. Now, we've seen here in Psalms how Christ exercised his dominion. In Genesis, we see how our dominion and responsibility was supposed to be. This time, Genesis 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. What was included in Adam's dominion? One glaring thing not included is the eating of animals. Verse 29 makes this very clear. Adam's duty is illuminated further in Genesis 2, verse 15. And the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. Adam was the caretaker of Eden. He had a responsibility to it. It was a mutually beneficial system. Adam was the steward of God's created works. Adam's dominion was no tyrannical, dictatorial exploitation. This is the beauty of God's dominion, that those he has dominion over praise him for it. Now, doesn't Adam's dominion here sound a lot like the dominion in Psalm 72? This is God's dominion. This is how it is in Eden, in heaven, and in the new earth. Upward look, page 291. Our work in this world is to reveal the pure principles that are current in heaven. But like every other principle of God, Satan has invented a counterfeit. He has warped our concept of God's dominion over us. God is believed to be a tyrant, a predestining God that decides who will be saved, and who will burn in hell. When Satan sends natural disasters that wipe out homes and lives, we have been convinced to call those acts of God. When children die of starvation and when friends die from disease or accident, we are told to lay the blame at the feet of God. All of this is Satan's version of God's dominion, and of course he has made his own version of our dominion over the animals. To understand our dominion and to understand God's dominion, we must first understand the difference between God's dominion and Satan's dominion. Whatever doesn't belong in God's dominion must fall into Satan's dominion. There are only two choices that we have to choose from. If we are not following God's plan, we are following Satan's plan. So then what is God's plan? God's dominion. Since sin entered the world, we now have permission to kill animals. Well, our question then becomes, when is it acceptable to take the life of an animal? Under what conditions did God allow the taking of animal life? Number one, capital punishment. Spelled out in the Old Testament is a detailed list of crimes that required the death penalty under Israel's theocracy. Number two, self-defense. This applied not only to the individual involved, but also when Israel was attacked by other nations. They had the ability to defend themselves justly. Number three, God's command. Israel was to destroy all the Canaanites out of the land without leaving any left at all. When Achan was stoned, his entire family and household were stoned as well, even though Achan himself was the one who had committed the crime. There are many instances where God himself or his human agents killed people at God's command. So these three categories cover the killing of humans allowed by God. Now we can discover when we are allowed to kill an animal. Now, the first category for humans, capital punishment, does not apply to the animals. Since animals cannot know the law of God, they are incapable of knowingly breaking it. So the first category for animals is as follows. Self-defense. If an animal attacks a human, it is acceptable to kill that particular animal. An obvious example of this is David and the lion. But that does not extend to entire species, only to the individual animal involved in the attack. This is the same as with human beings. Killing a human in self-defense does not mean that we can kill that human's relatives and friends. Number two, God's commands. Now, two main areas are included in this. The first are animal sacrifice. Immediately after sin, God commanded sacrifice to begin. In Leviticus, they were structured and organized. All pointed to Christ's sacrifice and were intended to bring home to man the horror of sin, the vileness of every act committed against God's law. But what God commands, he can also fulfill. When type met antitype, the sacrificial system reached its completion, and God made it clear that all animal sacrifice was to end. So now one area where God commanded man to kill animals has been repealed. The second area where God directed and allowed killing to take place was for food. Now this started after the flood in Genesis 9. But it is important to note that key restrictions were instituted at the exact same time that permission was allowed. Only the clean animals were to be eaten, as specifically listed later in the Levitical law. But the more important restriction was found in Genesis 9, verse 4. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. No blood was ever to be eaten. The Levitical law spelled that out in details in Leviticus 17. Is this command obeyed today by anyone other than Orthodox Jews? Ezekiel 33, verses 25 to 26, lists the eating of blood along with idol worship, adultery, and murder as Israel's chief sins. This indicates how serious God considers this particular sin to be. Now, some people claim that this restriction was part of the ceremonial law that was done away with at the cross and therefore is no longer relevant to Christians today. But as we have just looked at, the prohibition to never eat blood preceded the Levitical law by 1,000 years. It was there long before the Levitical law came into being. And it continued to be the rule for the growing Christian church after the death of Christ. And it was even stated in official church policy. This was at the time when they were deciding what was most necessary in the old ceremonial law to take forward into the new Christian church. And they actually had a church council, the highest authority in the Christian body at that time. And they decided what was going to be done. This is found in Acts 15, verses 28 to 29. For it seemed good to the Holy Ghost and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that ye abstain from meats offered to idols, and from blood, and from things strangled, and from fornication, from which if ye keep yourselves, ye shall do well. Now, Paul reaffirms this policy later on in Acts 21, verse 25. So, far from being abandoned at the time of the cross as a forgotten part of the Levitical law, the divine mandate never to eat blood was continued as a vital aspect of the Christian life. It was only during the Middle Ages that apostate Christianity ignored this divine instruction, as they ignored so many other Bible teachings. If the Christian basis for the permission to eat meat is from the Bible, then why don't Christians follow the entire mandate? Obviously, because bloodless meat is tasteless meat. All of the flavor is in the blood. This indicates that the ability of the post-flood humans to eat meat was intended to be a necessity, not a pleasure. Ellen White confirms this on Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 373. But on the same page, she actually gives another reason, even more important reason why meat eating was allowed at this time. God saw that the ways of man were corrupt, and he permitted that long-lived race to eat animal food to shorten their sinful lives. Soon after the flood, the race began to rapidly decrease in size and in length of years. So, in effect, it was a discipline for the race's wickedness that meat eating was allowed. Those today who argue for meat eating because the Bible allows it are in effect arguing for the opportunity to be disciplined and to have their lives shortened. If meat eating was a necessity, that leads to the conclusion that when it was no longer a necessity, it would no longer be done. Now, less advanced cultures in all ages have had a justifiable need to eat meat when better food was unavailable. But does that apply to us today in the United States and other developed nations where every conceivable type of food is readily available? A century ago, Ellen White extensively detailed how meat was not only unnecessary, but harmful. We are in the last days, the final atonement, when we should be striving to rid ourselves of the world's attractions. As God gives light to his people, he expects them to utilize it. This is found now in Spalding and McGann collection, page 46. After the fall, the eating of flesh was suffered in order to shorten the period of the existence of the long-lived race. It was allowed because of the hardness of the hearts of men. As we move on into the 21st century, God has clearly spelled out a better way. Will we continue to harden our hearts to his will? Now, the next question we need to look at is, we've looked at when we can take the life of an animal. Now we need to find out, when is it acceptable to cause an animal to suffer without causing them to actually die? Again, we must first examine God's dominion over us in the Bible to see what that entails. Number one, discipline, spanking a child, locking up a thief, giving leprosy to Elisha's servant, wandering 40 years in the wilderness, letting cause and effect run its course in all its myriad forms. All are forms of discipline. Number two, to save life. An example of this would be an operation that causes pain but saves the patient's life. Removing a gangrenous limb before it has a chance to spread its infection. Eating broccoli, one of the worst forms of torture ever discovered yet on earth. So now then, what about the animals? But there are many today who argue that animals do not suffer as much as humans, or maybe not even at all. Why is that, we ask? Well, they're different from us. So we need to ask the question, what is different between animals and people? So now let's ask that question of an evolutionist. What really separates humans and animals? Ask an evolutionist that question 60 years ago, and they will glibly rattle off a whole slew of differences that separate humans and animals. Ask that same evolutionist that same question today, and they will scratch their head and jump through hoops to try to figure out anything that they still hold that separates humans and animals. Every difference has crumbled in the face of modern discoveries of animal behavior. Tool use, modifying of the surroundings, existence of culture, art, language, all are now known to exist in animals. So then, let's ignore the evolutionist and ask a mainline Christian what the difference is between humans and animals. And that's easy. Their answer hasn't changed in 1,000 years. The difference between humans and animals is that humans have an immortal soul, animals don't. And that's the end of the story. That's all you need to say, and therefore we can do whatever we want to the animal kingdom because they do not have that immortal soul. Unfortunately, Adventists, even though discarding the concept of the immortal soul, have maintained and kept the attitude that goes along with it toward animals. We need to look very carefully at this because we need to know the difference. How was man created? In Genesis 2, verse 7, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Take away the breath of life, and man ceases to be a living soul. Now, the Hebrew word for soul in Scripture is nephesh. That is a word consistently used for humans every time it is referring to their soul. So now, let's remember that word as we go forward. We're going to now look at Genesis 7, verse 15. This is when the animals were coming in to the ark, 2 by 2. "And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life." So now animals have the breath of life like people do. Now we're going to look at Genesis 1, verse 20 and 24. "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life." And the word for creature is the same as with humans, soul, nephesh. "Let the earth bring forth the living creature, nephesh, after his kind." And then we go to Genesis 2, verse 19. "And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast out of the field, and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, nephesh, that was the name thereof." The word nephesh is used interchangeably in the Hebrew to describe both animals and humans. It is the same. They are living souls because they have the breath of life in exactly the same way that humans have the breath of life and therefore are living souls. And it even extends into the New Testament, where we find in Revelation 16, verse 3, at the time of the plagues, "And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea." So just as man has the breath of life and therefore is a living soul, so do animals have the breath of life and therefore are living souls. They are identical to us in that respect. The only defining difference that separates humans from the animals is that humans were made in the image of God. That, in its most important aspect, means that we have a conscience and can choose morally between right and wrong. But in terms of pain and suffering, there is no difference. We feel pain because we are vertebrates with a nervous system, and all vertebrate animals have the same nervous system and the capacity to feel pain. Our vertebra protects our spinal cord. From our spinal cord radiates nerves that lead to every part of our body. The free nerve endings are what register pain, heat, and cold. All animals with a vertebra have a spinal cord and a nervous system like ours. Their free nerve endings register pain, heat, and cold like ours do. The animals with a vertebra are divided into 5 groups: mammals, including humans, birds, reptiles, fish, and amphibians. All of these animals feel pain in the same way that we do physically. Animals feel with emotions. Animals have intelligence. They think things out and make choices based on their experiences. Entire books have been written documenting cases of animal intelligence and animal emotion. I have spent most of my adult life studying animal intelligence and animal emotion, and I can testify of its truth. I could spend a week listing examples of animals using their intelligence or showing their feelings. But I don't need to, since there is clear inspiration from Ellen White showing the truth of this. In Ministry of Healing, page 315 to 316, as I look at that, let's remember three questions. Do animals have intelligence? Do animals experience emotions? And do animals suffer? Ministry of Healing, page 315. The intelligence displayed by many dumb animals approaches so closely to human intelligence that it is a mystery. The animals see and hear and love and fear and suffer. They use their organs far more faithfully than many human beings use theirs. They manifest sympathy and tenderness toward their companions in suffering. Many animals show an affection for those who have charge of them, far superior to the affection shown by some of the human race. They form attachments for many which are not broken without great suffering to them. Animals experience physical pain, such as heat and cold. They suffer in this way. And emotional suffering, such as loss, unhappiness, and terror. So since we have shown that they suffer as we do, now we can go back to our question of when can we cause them to suffer? When is it acceptable to cause them to suffer? Again, as with taking life, causing suffering is the same as with humans. Number one, discipline. We use a leash to prevent the dogs from chasing the neighbors. We spay and neuter dogs and cats to prevent them from hurting themselves or others. When ducks gather to nest, we put up electric fences around them to shock any fox out to eat the egg. Now, my grandfather raised many chickens over the years, and sometimes they got into the very bad habit of egg eating, where the hens would break open a newly laid egg and eat out the contents and devour it, and it was gone. Now, this could not be tolerated. My grandfather raised them for show and for the eggs, and so he needed to stop this very quickly. And he had a discipline that he always used when this came up. He would take one of the newly hatched eggs and he would break open a small corner of it, and then he would fill up that egg with extra strong hot sauce, the most virulent, toxic hot sauce that he could find. Fill it all up, put it back out in the coop, and just walk away. Very soon it would become obvious which of the chickens were innocent of egg eating and which of them were guilty of egg eating. The innocent ones looked the same as they always did. The guilty ones were wandering around the coop with a dazed look in their eye, bill hanging open, panting as they recovered from the effects of the discipline that they had suffered. And it was a form of discipline that was very effective. It worked very well because very soon there were no chickens guilty of egg eating, and it was very effective in stopping that practice. Number two, to save life. Taking animals to a vet terrifies them, but it's often necessary. Giving them medicine or restricting their food also is sometimes important. Now, up to this point, we've looked at what we can do to animals, when we can kill them, when we can cause them to suffer. Now we need to look at what about our responsibility for the animals. We have looked at what we can do against the animals. To start with, we're going to look at Desire of Ages, page 500. The merciful provisions of the law extended even to the lower animals, which cannot express in words their want and suffering. There's many passages in the old Levitical law that was designed specifically to reduce the suffering of the animals underneath the care of the Israelites. But the verse that sums it up is Proverbs 12, verse 10. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Now, the first half of this verse is God's dominion. The second half of this verse is Satan's dominion, all put together in one short verse. Mrs. White expands this in Signs of the Time, November 25, 1880. Here is a lesson to all who have reasoning powers, that harsh treatment even to the brutes is offensive to God. Those who profess to love God do not always consider that abuse to animals or suffering brought upon them by neglect is a sin. The fruits of divine grace will be as truly revealed in men by the manner in which they treat their beasts as by their service in the house of God. Those who allow themselves to become impatient or enraged with their animals are not Christians. A man who is harsh, severe, and domineering toward the lower animals because he has them in his power is both a coward and a tyrant. If animals could speak, what deeds of horror would be revealed? What tales of suffering because of the perversity of man's temper? How often these creatures of God's care suffer pain, endure hunger and thirst because they cannot make known their wants. And how often is it determined by the mercy or caprice of man whether they receive attention and kindness or neglect and abuse? Punishment given in passion to an animal is frequently excessive and is then absolute cruelty. Animals have a kind of dignity and self-respect akin to that possessed by human beings. If abused under the influence of blind passion, their spirits will be crushed, and they will become nervous, irritable, and ungovernable. Why do we, as Adventists, promote vegetarianism? Is it only because it is healthier? This afternoon, we have looked at the principles of health in the way that it relates to our lives, and that's very useful, and that's very important. But is that the only reason? Is that the only reason we should be vegetarian, is because our own health is better if we are vegetarian? If we think that the only reason to avoid meat is because of our own health, then we are ignoring a huge area of Ellen White's writings that detail this subject. She has as much to say about the cruelty to animals involved as any other single reason. Even if meat was perfectly healthy, it would still be wrong because of the cruelty to animals. The following are only a few of her many statements dealing with this. These are found in Manuscript Releases, Volume 7, page 423. I might fill the pages with descriptions of the sights I have seen, the suffering among the animals that are to be used for food. When a sheep in a flock lies down and cannot rise, the others leap over or upon it as they proceed. A large box wagon follows the flock, and I have seen the drivers take up the heavy sheep when unable to travel farther and bounce them into the wagon right upon their backs. And I have counted no less than 8 sheep, some already dead, and others in the agonies of death, lying by the roadside after the flock had passed. But I will not go on to describe these sickening sights. If I had not, prior to this time, discarded the use of the flesh of dead animals, I should now take the pledge to eat no more meat as long as fruits and vegetables can be obtained. On page 421 to 22, we saw a large herd of cattle in the road ahead of us. Some animals had been wounded. Some were limping along. One poor suffering creature had both horns broken off close to his head, and the blood was flowing from the wound. Some were very lame and were pictures of brute misery, taken from the green paddocks and traveling for weary miles over the hot, dusty road. These poor creatures are driven to their death, so that human beings may feast on their miserable, dead carcasses. Manuscript Releases, Volume 3, page 306. Your wrong habits of eating have so educated your moral powers that you have not the spirit of a Christian. Your temper is perverse, and your treatment of dumb animals is wrong. The next few are all found in Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 380 to 386. Not an ounce of flesh meat should enter our stomachs. How much? It's too bad that Ellen White wasn't clear enough on this issue to leave us in doubt. It's too bad she didn't make her position very clear, and we have no light to really understand what we should be doing. The eating of flesh is unnatural. Let them rather return to the wholesome and delicious food given to man in the beginning, and themselves practice mercy toward the dumb creatures that God has made and has placed under our dominion. Will the people who are seeking to become holy, pure, refined, that they may be introduced into the society of heavenly angels, continue to take the life of God's creatures and enjoy their flesh as a luxury? Many who are now only half converted in the question of meat eating will go from God's people to walk no more with them. Think of the cruelty to animals that meat eating involves, and its effect on those who inflict and those who behold it, how it destroys the tenderness with which we should regard these creatures of God. Animals are often transported long distances and subjected to great suffering in reaching a market. Taken from the green pastures and traveling for weary miles over the hot, dusty roads, or crowded into filthy cars, feverish and exhausted, often for many hours deprived of food and water, the poor creatures are driven to their death, that human beings may feast on the carcasses. Some animals are inhumanely treated while being brought to the slaughter. They are literally tortured, and after they have endured many hours of extreme suffering, are butchered. The question is often asked of me, is it a sin to eat meat? The only way to answer that is to go to inspiration and find what God has told us in this area. Now, as we have seen, to eat any animal with the blood still in it is totally forbidden. It makes no difference if it is a clean animal or not. So to eat a chicken or a cow with the blood still in it is as much of a sin as to eat a pig. Ellen White has made it clear that when better foods are available, that it is no longer permitted for us to eat meat in the last days of history. For example, Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 390. In a country such as this, where there are fruits, grains, and nuts in abundance, how can one think that he must eat the flesh of dead animals? On the next page, we have plenty of good things to satisfy hunger without bringing corpses upon our table to compose our bill of fare. So the answer to our question is this: it is a sin to eat meat if better food is available, or if we are eating blood-containing meat, which is all the meat found in restaurants and on supermarket shelves, unless it is specifically listed as kosher. The Bible and Spirit of Prophecy are very clear about this. Now, in the century since Ellen White wrote her extremely strong statements condemning the way that we raise food in our society, we have invented a totally new way of raising food in our society called factory farming. The animals killed for food today are completely removed from the old McDonald's farm of the past. Factory farming is big business. Whatever is cost-effective is the only consideration. Mass-produced chickens and turkeys are raised in warehouses. As they grow to full size, they become a solid mass of birds with no space to spare. Far overcrowded, they literally rub each other raw. The weaker are trampled to death. Disease spreads like wildfire. Injured and diseased birds are left untreated until they die. Pigs and many cows are kept in closed concrete stalls. They are fed whatever fattens them quickest, not what keeps them healthy. To prevent disease, they receive massive amounts of antibiotics, in the long run making them even more unhealthy. Pigs are actually as intelligent as dogs and have complex emotions. An undercover reporter of conditions in a factory farm would each morning find all the pigs sleeping together in a group, as one of the pigs had learned how to open the latch on her stall and would then go out through all the other pig stalls and unlatch all the other pig latches until they were all free, and then they could mingle together and enjoy each other's company. So every morning, the undercover reporter would take the pigs and lock them back up in their individual stalls where they had come from, and there they would stay until evening time came again, and the female pig would again release them all to their evening enjoyment. Now, all of these animals end up being transported long distances, unprotected from heat or cold. To save some money, they are not fed or watered on these trips. They are pushed, dragged, prodded, shocked, and beaten. Many fall and break legs or hips or are too sick to move. Those are called downers, and they are left where they lie to die, however long it takes. If the slaughterers get to them before they die, they attach chains to their legs and drag them to the kill floor. If the animals die first, they are used for pet food. Is any of this that I'm describing God's dominion, or is it all Satan's dominion? Most beef cattle and sheep are raised on open rangeland throughout the West. Any animal that even remotely competes with them are considered vermin and killed on sight. The ranching industry is directly responsible for the eradication of scores of species, including eliminating grizzlies, condors, wolverines, and wolves from most of the United States. Little prairie dogs have been killed by the billions for no other reason than that they dig burrows and eat grass. And so those not poisoned are killed in a novel way. Hunters will set up a lawn chair next to a prairie dog colony like this and will spend their day shooting every prairie dog that sticks his head out of the burrow. They will score points in this process depending on how badly mangled the individual prairie dogs will be. And in this way, they will be able to spend a very enjoyable sporting day of it while they help to get rid of one of these horrible, horrible prairie dog colonies that cause us so much problems, when in fact they don't cause us any problems at all. And so now, because of this, the rarest mammal in North America, the black-footed ferret, depended on prairie dog colonies for their survival. As the prairie dog colonies were destroyed, they are now down to 3% or less of their original population. The black-footed ferret became virtually extinct, and now much cost and effort is expended trying to restore them back to their original homes. So now we spend millions of dollars to save and restore what we spent millions of dollars to destroy. For not only do the individual ranchers slaughter the animals, the government's wildlife services kills 1 million animals every year, all to benefit nothing but ranching. They kill them and how do they kill them? With traps and poisons that kill anything indiscriminately. They corner babies in their dens and gas or burn them to death. All of this bloodshed so that we can butcher the cows ourselves in our meat-addicted culture. Now, up to this point, you may have noticed some of the pictures have been getting a little bit more grim than when we started. Now, you will be thinking perhaps that I have taken the most gory, graphic pictures that I could find off the internet to display what I've been talking about. In fact, I've done just the opposite. I found the least objectionable, gory pictures that I could possibly find to display what I was talking about, because there's far worse that I did not choose from to illustrate this sermon. Now, however, that has one little PG warning. The next few pictures are the worst that I show. And so I'm giving you a little warning. If you can make it through the next dozen or so pictures, the rest will not be as bad. I do believe it is important that we realize how serious this really is, that we realize what is actually being done to the animal life and not pretend that it doesn't exist. And so with that in mind, we go forward. We rake the oceans with fishing nets that kill everything in their paths: fish, dolphins, whales, birds. 75% of the world's fisheries are at the maximum level of sustainable fishing. Any increase in the fish killed would cause biological collapse, a chain reaction that leaves almost nothing left alive. The other 25% of the world's fisheries are already past the point of biological collapse. They cannot recover no matter what we do. And when the fish disappear, we blame the animals, never ourselves. The seals, dolphins, and sharks become our scapegoats, and we wage war upon them. Dolphins are rounded up in Japan and elsewhere and hacked and stabbed to death. They are not killed for food, but only because they eat fish and therefore have to be eliminated as a competitor. The oceans turn solid red with the blood of these innocent, intelligent, sensitive creatures. And this is not an open ocean. This is a bay over in Japan that has been turned red by the blood of these animals. God's dominion or Satan's dominion. Dairy cows are also confined extensively. Their life is a constant cycle of being impregnated, giving birth, and having their day-old calves taken from them. The bond between mother and calf is as strong in the cows as it is in every other large mammal, as the story of one mother cow in England demonstrates. When this mother cow gave birth to her baby, the farmer didn't want to keep either one of them any longer, and so she sold the farmer sold the mother to a farm and sold the baby to a totally different farm, splitting up the mother from her newborn young. Now, the next morning, the farmer who had bought the mother cow came out to the stall and found that it was broken open. The mother cow had disappeared, nowhere to be found. The farmer who had bought the baby cow came out that morning and found that baby nursing from his mother. The mother cow had traveled 7 miles to a farm she had never seen before in her life to find her missing baby. This is a wonderful example of motherly love and dedication. Female dairy cows are sent back into the system. They're useful, but males have no point in the dairy system, and so are sent to veal stalls. There they are chained in a 2-foot wide box. They can stand up and lie down. Stand up and lie down. Nothing more. They are fed a nutrient-deficient diet to keep their flesh the right color. They are prevented from exercising to keep their muscles soft. For 6 months, they are purposely kept anemic and sick, all so that their flesh can be provided as a delicacy. As has been very well said, every glass of milk contains a slice of veal, for you cannot buy any dairy product without supporting the veal industry. It is one industry, it is not two industry. The dairy and veal industry are totally the same thing. Female dairy cows are so bloated by growth hormones and milk-producing drugs that their bodies are far too large and easily break down or become infected. They are treated as living machines and are disposed of in the same way. Ellen White in 1899 wrote the following: "The light given me is that it will not be very long," remember those words, not very long, "before we shall have to give up using any animal food. Even milk will have to be discarded." So what does she mean by not very long? What is the meaning of that key phrase? 3 years later, she wrote another statement: "Animals are becoming more and more diseased, and it will not be long," same words, until animal food will be discarded by many besides Seventh-day Adventists. Has that prophecy by Ellen White been fulfilled in our society? Many people who have no religious interest whatsoever have given up dairy and animal products because they want to eliminate the contamination, the cruelty, and the waste involved. So if not very long has already come about and been fulfilled, then what about the last statement where she said, "It will not be very long before we shall have to give up using animal foods, and even milk will have to be discarded"? This time has come and is past. We need to be paying attention to the counsel that Ellen White has given it and not playing games with what she has said. Will we still be waiting and saying the time will not be far away when we see a small cloud coming out of the sky? Will we still be holding on to it at that point? Now, I used to believe that since I ate no meat that I was free from causing cruelty. But I still ate eggs, and I was dismayed to learn how laying hens were treated in our society. In cages that are 2 feet square, up to 9 full-size hens are jammed. They cannot spread a single wing. Their feathers are rubbed off, and soon they have open sores. In such crowds, cannibalism becomes common, so every hen has her beak sliced off to cause her intense pain whenever she pecks at another. Of course, all the male chicks are killed immediately by the millions. They have no use in the egg-laying industry. The ammonia buildup in the warehouses from the hens' droppings is so bad that workers who enter those sheds must wear masks when they enter. But the hens are forced to breathe it 24 hours a day. Wire floors are not good for chicken feet, and the nails on their toes keep growing and become enmeshed in the wire, and they will then never be able to free them again. If they are near the food, they survive. Come slaughter time, when their egg-laying rate slows, the hens are so violently removed from their cages that often feet and partial legs can be found in the empty cages, still attached to the wire floor by their overgrown nails. If you want to know what it is like to be an egg-laying hen in our society, try this test. After the meeting, go home and get inside a normal-sized car in a closed garage and bring 7 or 8 other people with you. After everyone has gotten inside the car, roll up the windows, lock the doors, and never leave again for the next 2 years. That's the life of a battery hen today. So I have a simple equation that I now use whenever I'm tempted to eat an egg. 1 egg equals 22 hours. 22 hours is the average time between each egg laid by a factory hen. 22 hours of absolute, unrelenting misery of an innocent, helpless, suffering creation of God. 1 hard-boiled egg equals 22 hours. A couple fried, 44. A large quiche or an omelet is worth days of suffering, all contained on 1 plate. Is any of this God's dominion, or is this Satan's dominion? For thousands of years, much of people's food has been obtained by hunting and fishing. But with modern farming, hunting is now mainly for sport. There is no stronger indictment of the way that we treat animals than that we kill them purely for fun and entertainment. Desire of Ages, page 356 to 357. Satan's hatred against God leads him to hate every object of the Savior's care. He seeks to mar the handiwork of God, and he delights in destroying even the dumb creatures. A better description of sport hunting could not be written. Millions killed every year in the U.S. alone, all for trophies and bragging rights. Safaris that kill one of every species of African antelope to have each variety of horns. To make it more fun, many hunters use as inefficient a weapon as possible. Bow and arrow users lose half the deer that they shoot. Those that escape end up dying by themselves from blood loss, infection, or from having the arrow penetrate deeper to a vital organ. State wildlife agencies build up game species for hunters at the expense of all other wildlife. Hunters cause an average of 1,100 human injuries per year and between 100 to 200 human deaths per year. And then there's sport fishing, which is merely hunting for fish. Now remember, fish are vertebrates with a nervous system that feels pain just like our nervous system feels pain. They don't show it like other animals because we can't hear the sounds that they make without special equipment. Fish have the same social lives and emotional feelings as every other vertebrate animal. In South Africa, an aquarium had an Oranda goldfish named Big Red. Now, into Big Red's tank was placed a very special Moor goldfish named Blackie. Now, Blackie was born with birth defects that prevented him from swimming properly or even able to function. Now, but he was still able to survive. Now, from the moment that Blackie was put into Big Red's tank, Big Red sensed Blackie's helplessness and took it upon himself to be Blackie's friend. Big Red would pick Blackie up on his back and help him around the tank to wherever they needed to go. When the food was sprinkled onto the surface of the tank, Big Red would get underneath Blackie and raise him up to the surface so that they both could feed. Now, at the time this story was reported, it had been going on in this way for over a year. This is a year of altruism, the giving of yourself without hope of reward, being shown from a small fish on a continued basis. But no regard is ever given to the fish, and the worst tortures are heaped upon them so that we can relax and enjoy the outdoors. The fish hooks we use rip into their mouths with all the intensity that a nail would feel in our mouths. They use their mouth to examine their surroundings since they have no hands or paws. Often hooked fish lose their ability to eat until the gaping wound heals. Fish lose their protective coat of mucus by being handled by humans. Without this mucus, they are susceptible to bacteria and waterlogged tissues, both of which can be fatal. Many fish are so exhausted from fighting the fisherman's line that when released, they go into shock for hours and are easily caught by predators. A Canadian study found that a hooked fish removed from the water and kept out of the water for 60 seconds and then put back into the water, catch and release, had a 72% mortality rate. 72% of the fish after their release died. Nobody can tell me that it is more humane to catch and release a fish when you have a 72% mortality rate of the fish that are being released. Those not thrown back slowly die by drowning in the air. Sometimes that will take well over an hour. I have watched fish being skinned alive as they struggled. Our casual acceptance of cruelty toward fish because they look and act differently from other animals is based largely upon our own emotional attachments to animals that seem more like us. When our pleasure causes others pain, we fit the description of the pre-flood inhabitants in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 92. They delighted in destroying the life of animals, and the use of flesh for food rendered them still more cruel and bloodthirsty, until they came to regard human life with astonishing indifference. Now, please understand that what I'm talking about here tonight is not part of a political agenda or the regular environmental issues that are so often discussed by our society. There are many meat-eating, hunting, fishing environmentalists who would be very annoyed by the subjects I'm talking about here tonight. We must examine each of our practices with animals to see if we are following God's dominion or Satan's dominion and take steps to change things in our lives if wrong is being done. Mrs. White had much to say about the North's responsibility for the Civil War. They did not own slaves in the North, but they allowed slavery to continue. Testimonies, Volume 1, page 359. God is punishing the North that they have so long suffered the accursed sin of slavery to exist. God holds us responsible if we allow wrong to continue by our silence and apathy. To say it's not our problem is to shirk our God-given duty. Animals in the entertainment industry. Animals are abused on a continual basis to provide us with entertainment. Circus animals travel most of the year in tiny cages, unprotected from the weather. Look at any major circus, and virtually every animal there has been or is being abused. A trainer was caught in the act of showing other elephant trainers how you treat an elephant to get him to obey you. It involved beating the elephant until it was so terrified of the trainer that it would not do anything other than what the trainer wanted him to do. And this was the recommended way for trainers to learn how to treat their animals. And so when we look at any circus animal, that is the fate of what we are talking about. Even then there are those blood sports, such as bullfighting and cockfighting, whose only aim is to kill the animals painfully. Even such tradition as rodeo involves broken bones, pain, fear, and death as a matter of course. Greyhounds are taught to race using live rabbits hanging from the end of a pole. Of course, those greyhounds not fast enough are also killed, often in secret. Is abusing animals for entertainment God's dominion or Satan's dominion? The brutality and bloodshed that occur at rattlesnake roundups are almost too gruesome to describe. Gasoline is poured into the rattlesnake dens and burrows to force them out. Many never recover from being so poisoned, and many animals that share those burrows, such as the gopher tortoise, are also poisoned, as well as having their homes ruined. The gopher tortoise has become very, very rare, in large part due to this rattlesnake gassing. Every conceivable torture that is inflicted upon the rattlesnakes ripped from their wild homes. No protection or mercy of any kind is allowed for an animal so vilified by society. They are burned, beheaded, crushed, blinded, stabbed, maimed, beaten, and skinned and eventually eaten in a carnival-type atmosphere. And they feel and suffer as much as every other animal would in the same situation. Mammals used for fur are killed in two ways. First are those raised on farms, such as mink, foxes, and chinchillas. They spend their short, miserable lives crowded into wire cages, unprotected from the weather, until they are killed by electrocution, strychnine, or having their necks broken. Second are those caught in the wild with leg-hold traps. Traps catch anything that touches them. Pet dogs and cats, songbirds, deer, For every fur animal caught in a trap, 2 so-called trash animals are killed by the trapper and thrown away. Animals caught remain for hours or days until their trapper returns. Some chew off their leg and bleed to death elsewhere. The returning trapper does not want to damage the pelt, so they club, crush, or stomp the trapped animal to death. Around the world, most cat species are now endangered due to the fur industry. Seals and kangaroos slaughtered endlessly. All of this bloodshed for fur-lined gloves, jacket trim, coats, knickknacks, trivial souvenirs, alligator shoes, snakeskin belts, bearskin rugs, ostrich skin wallets. 6 million fur bearers plus 4 million non-target trash animals killed every year for nothing at all but fashion and appearance. God's dominion, or Satan's dominion. We lavish millions of dollars on our pets. We give them the best of love and attention until we grow tired of them. If they become inconvenient or too expensive, then we dispose of them. Some people set them free at campgrounds, rest areas, in forests and towns. Hardly any of these will survive. Most of them will die from disease, starvation, or being hit by cars. Those that live eke out a slim living. I once found a pair of skin and bone hunting dogs in a national forest that gorged themselves on the cat food that we put out for them. For every human being born in this country, 15 dogs and 45 cats are born, and there is nowhere for them to go. So most are left at pounds, and that's where most will die. Roughly 5 million companion animals are put to sleep every year. That works out to something like every 5 seconds, all because we will not take the effort to spay our dogs and cats. Okay, I just hit a button and lost it. All right, I'm going to need help here. I got a whole page of iPad stuff, and that's not going to work. Will it go back to the same place, or will we have to? Yeah, this first time I've ever used an iPad, so that's bear with me. Oh, good, same place. Preview next. I don't have to have that if I don't need it, so it's fine. Okay. All right, so all because we will not take the effort to spay and neuter our pets in our care, and because we allow animal breeding puppy mills to continue to exist. Are we fulfilling our God-given duty of stewardship toward our most loyal friends? Parrots are being driven to the brink of extinction to supply the illegal pet trade. On their way to us, 9 out of 10 will die, 90%. Those that survive end up as living curios, stuck in a cage for their color and their beauty. Many live as long as we do, 80 to 90 years, forever cut off from the life that they should be living. Tropical fish are caught with cyanide. Again, up to 90% of those fish caught dying en route to the pet store before they ever reach us. But in addition, the coral reef and any non-target animals are left dead from the cyanide that has been used in their capture. All again so that they can end up in tiny tanks for our amusement. Now, in the past, it has been taught that the best way to learn about human anatomy and to learn about the theory of evolution was to dissect other species, such as frogs and cats. But modern advances in computer programs and detailed human models have made such studies obsolete. Because of dissection, many wild populations of frogs have been wiped out, and it is not uncommon for lost or stolen dogs and cats to end up on the classroom table. We must not devalue life by killing just because it is convenient. Dissection is literally a dead-end education. We should teach the most important lesson of all, the respect for life. Now, one final area we need to examine is whether we can cause animal suffering to save human life. We looked at animal suffering independent, but what about if we can actually save human life? This is very important and needs careful thought. Is experimentation on animals a justified practice? First, we need to note that we experiment all the time on human beings to test new products. They are called clinical tests, and they involve only volunteers. We must always remember that animals in such tests are never volunteers. They have no choice. So we must strive very hard to limit such tests to only the absolutely crucial. We cannot cause animal suffering for trivial, repetitive, or useless tests. We must examine animal research to determine its worth individually. We will look at a few examples. One major area of animal research is cosmetic testing. Dozens of rabbits per test are enclosed in metal boxes with only their heads protruding. Then various substances are poured into their eyes to see how much damage is done. Go to your bathroom or laundry and try to find any product that hasn't been tested in this way. It can't be done. Bleach, hairspray, shampoo, mascara, and detergent are all being used to blind rabbits in pointless tests. Other animals are force-fed large quantities of toothpaste, lipstick, or creams until half the animals succumb to convulsions, paralysis, and death. Others have chemicals that are applied to their bare skin, causing massive chemical burns to measure skin irritancy levels. The companies that continue these tests say that it is for public safety and because the tests are required by law. That is a lie. No law requires these tests to be performed, and over 600 companies that never test on animals prove the truth of that. A few examples of the hundreds of companies that do not test on animals include famous names like Avon, Revlon, and Tresemme. Results of cosmetic tests are only valid on the animal species that they were performed on. To help humans, tests would need to show the exact amount of a substance required to harm a human being, and these tests never show that. Every time we buy a product from a company that tests on animals, we are saying to them, it's all right to do this. You don't need to change. Here's some more money to blind rabbits. We are making it possible for the suffering to continue by our buying choices. Modern alternative tests that do not use animals and are as accurate or better than animal tests are readily available, but companies will not switch until we force them to by our wallets. Another vast area of animal research involves psychology tests. Now, these are done with the stated purpose of learning how the animals themselves think, learn, and develop. They are not intended to show anything about humans, except to evolutionists wanting to show how our behavior evolved from monkey behavior. Endless tests are done on every variety of animal to find out how they react to punishment, such as electric shock. Finding out how dogs suffer from electric shock and the lengths that they will go to avoid it is in no way a benefit to human beings, and it certainly is not a benefit to the dogs. Young monkeys are placed in smooth-walled wells of despair for days, weeks, and months at a time. They have no light, no interaction, nothing to touch or feel for the entire time. The point of these studies is to find out how those baby monkeys will react once they have been removed from their isolation. Not surprisingly, they are severely psychologically damaged, spending the rest of their lives huddling in corners, arms held around their bodies, afraid and terrified of everyone and everything. As sad a case as any are the monkeys taken from their mothers at birth and then given to fake mothers that look and feel like monkeys but act very differently. Designed to be monsters, these fake mothers become red hot or ice cold, eject compressed air, or hurl the baby away from them. Others eject sharp brass spikes from every surface of their body, impaling any baby that won't let go. The terrified monkeys have no real mother to turn to, nowhere to go. They wait for their mother to stop hurting them and then crawl back onto it until the next time that their mother becomes a monster. All monkeys raised like this are forever mentally unstable and are unable to interact with normal monkeys the rest of their life. Their lives become constant isolation and fear. God's dominion or Satan's dominion. Now, the researcher who conducted these tests was also the editor of a magazine that published psychology test results. Now, over the years, he reviewed thousands of tests to determine which studies he would actually print, because there were far too many to include them all. So he made a very interesting comment about the tests that he reviewed for his publication. Quote, "Most experiments are not worth doing, and the data attained are not worth publishing." A telling comment from a defender of all research. In 2006, the online version of the British Medical Journal presented the unreliability of animal testing this way, quote, "Animal studies are of limited usefulness to human health because they are of poor quality and their results often conflict with human trials," unquote. If the experts don't trust the results of vivisection, then why should we? The unfortunate reality is that most tests done have been done before. Tests done over 100 years ago are still being done with minor variations and nothing new to be learned. There is such a mind-numbing mountain of tests conducted that no researcher is able to keep up on what has been done before. Many researchers come up with new variations to ensure a continued flow of grant money, not because anything important will be learned. Albert Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. If tests benefit human life, then we can understand their value. But what about tests that are incapable of helping humans in any way? A famous series of tests have been performed by Dr. Robert White, a vocal spokesman for unrestricted, unlimited animal tests. His tests involved cutting off the heads of live monkeys and switching them, transplanting heads on still living beings and keeping them alive. Can humans in any way benefit from head transplantation? The only one I can think of is Frankenstein. One last area that I'll mention is the area of drug testing. Now, surely we would think that this would be a useful area because we need to test new drugs on an animal to see if it is safe before giving it to a human. So a government study was conducted on every new drug marketed between the years of 1976 and 1985 to see how they compared to what the animal tests had shown. The study found that half of those drugs had been relabeled or withdrawn entirely from the market because they were found to be more dangerous on people than the animal tests had shown. In this country, we use 40,000 different types of pesticides. Every single pesticide has been proven safe using animal tests. Now, does anyone here really think that all 40,000 of those pesticides are safe for us to have around? One pesticide no longer used in the United States, although it is still used in other countries, that was also proven safe using animal tests was DDT. And we all know how dangerous that particular one has turned out to be. Animal research can often be used as a wax nose to prove whatever the researcher wants. Government agencies, by using animal tests, have been proving for years that cigarettes are addictive and harmful. But at the same time, tobacco-run animal tests have been proving for years that cigarettes are not addictive or harmful. And these tests continue to this day by both sides, proving whatever the researcher wants them to prove. But how can this be? How can the results of animal testing be so different between different species and between us and the animals? The reality is that every species is a different biological and biochemical entity. Each reacts differently to any given substance. Aspirin kills cats, and penicillin kills guinea pigs. When the discoverers of penicillin were testing it, they had just run out of guinea pigs and had to use other animals. If they had tested penicillin on guinea pigs, it would have been lethal, and they would have had no idea the effectiveness of penicillin at all. But the same guinea pigs can safely eat strychnine, one of the deadliest poisons for humans, but not for monkeys. Sheep can swallow enormous quantities of arsenic. Potassium cyanide, deadly for humans, is harmless for owls. Insulin produces deformities in infant rabbits and mice. A dose of opium that would kill a man is harmless to dogs and chickens. These are only a fraction of such examples. A list of this type is by definition almost infinite because every substance used will have different results on different species, and will even have different results on different strains of the same species. But one more example needs telling. About 30 or 40 years ago, some scientists thought there might be promise from using the bark of the Pacific yew tree in treating cancer. They took an extract from that bark and they used it to test their theory. They infected healthy animals with cancer and then used the extract to treat those animals. And they were very disappointed. No result occurred, no improvement took place, and so the scientists decided that the extract was useless and abandoned it. Now, the Pacific yew tree is a small, scraggly, understory tree that lives in the Pacific Northwest of North America, California up to British Columbia. It is a worthless tree for lumber, and so the lumbermen don't like it at all. And so they usually will cut it down and burn it when they cut down the regular trees, and they will just throw the yew trees away. Now, here's a picture of a yew tree that started growing in 1865, and I took this picture a few years ago. It shows they don't get very big very fast. Now, a decade ago, scientists were really thinking that there should be something with this Pacific yew extract. It really should have worked. And so they decided to try again. But this time they used clinical human tests instead of animal tests, and the results were astonishing. The extract was extremely effective in treating certain forms of cancer, far better than anything else we had available. It was, in fact, the most promising treatment to come along in ages. But now there was a serious problem. For 30 years, lumbermen had been wastefully destroying yews as a trash tree, and so now it was hard to find enough yew trees to provide the extract. So two drastic consequences resulted from our faith in animal testing. First, the treatment of cancer patients was delayed for 3 decades. Second, for all that time, the main source of the treatment was allowed to be foolishly destroyed instead of being utilized. How many other life-saving drugs have been lost to us in this way? In this yew case, our reliance upon animal tests has actually cost human life. We must ask ourselves, in the cases of vivisection that we have looked at, and many more, do they save human life? And if not, then why are they allowed to continue? Tens of millions of animals suffer and are killed every year in U.S. labs. I wish everyone here could know the things that go on behind the closed doors of the labs, could see what happens to the animals. Monkeys with steel bolts drilled into their skulls to hold in electronic attachments wired into their brains. The monkeys are not given any anesthesia in this procedure, as that would affect the results of the test. But a simple question I would have is, does screwing steel bolts into a monkey's skull without anesthesia affect the results of your test? Chimpanzees are infected with the HIV virus. They cannot get AIDS. Nothing that we have tried has given them that particularly human disease. But once infected, they can never be let out of their cages or have any kind of interaction with humans or other chimps. They now are a carrier. And so they spend their entire lives in a cell the size of a closet. They can live that way for 40 to 50 years, all alone in the dark. Sitting in there with nothing to do, they slowly go insane, rocking back and forth, circling endlessly, biting their hands and feet, banging their head on the wall. They are living death and a live testament of our treatment of the animal world. We need a new perception of the animal world than that which we have inherited. We lavish attention, time, and money upon our cats and dogs. Pets are wonderful. Everybody loves kitties and puppies. But beyond them, things change. Cows and chickens are for eating. That's what God made them for. Ducks and moose are here to be hunted. The only possible purpose of a fish is to be impaled upon a hook. All predators are pure evil and must be eradicated. The only good snake is a dead snake. We think animals are beautiful in pictures and nature films, but let them do anything that causes us the slightest inconvenience, and the first solution proposed is to kill them. We marvel at the colors on a butterfly and unthinkingly squash every moth that we can find, when in reality moths are virtually identical to butterflies. For woe unto any animal that doesn't meet with our standard of beauty. Everyone knows all about bats and spiders, octopuses and snakes. They are ugly, so they must be bad. The reality is that most people know next to nothing about such animals, and what they do know is 95% nonsense. Test yourself, true or false. Bats fly into people's hair. Bats suck blood. Tarantulas swarm onto people, biting them to death. Snakes leap out of trees to strangle people. Octopuses pull swimmers down to their death. All of these answers are, of course, false, as are hundreds of other stories that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Stories created hundreds of years ago to scare people are passed on as gospel truth from generation to generation. Until we throw away the myths, we will never appreciate animals for what they really are: living, breathing, feeling creations of God with their own lives and purposes in God's plan. We may not understand that purpose, and it may in fact have nothing to do with us, but that in no way negates the importance of it. As an illustration of our thoughtlessness in caring for the animal creation entrusted to our dominion, we need only look at the list of those animals threatened with extinction. That list has grown over the years until it includes over 1,000 animal species. That does not include the hundreds of animals that have gone extinct already in the last 500 years. And once they are gone, we can never get them back, no matter how much we may want to. Right now, there is a huge crisis in North America with the bat world. A fungus has started infecting bats in the northeastern part of the country, and it kills all bats that it infects, 100% mortality. And right now, New England has lost most of its bats. And I was just up there in Maine. We were holding meetings up there, and I virtually saw no bats while we were up there. And we talked to the church members who tell us that every single bit of food they get from their garden has to be fought for, because the insect population has exploded over the last few years. Their insects are much worse than they've ever been before, and that's due to the loss of the bats, which keep the insect populations in control. God has plans for all of these animals that affect all the ways that we live, and sometimes we don't realize how important they are until they are lost. The question has often been asked, these are horrible things that I'm describing here tonight. Obviously, they are horrible, horrible things, but what can we do about it? We are not able to change anything. We often feel helpless to change wrongs that are being done, but we actually have more influence than we realize. In tonight's presentation, I have very carefully chosen only those issues that we in this country can alter by our actions. I'm not asking you to go out and picket McDonald's. I'm not asking you to join every animal protection group available. What I am asking is that we examine our own lives to see where we are involved in cruelty to animals and take steps to eliminate our involvement with that cruelty. There are 3 steps that we can all take to save the lives of animals. Number 1, never directly cause an animal to die. Hunting and fishing are obvious, but just as deadly are meat and fur. Every time we buy any fur or ivory or meat, we directly cause animals to die. Don't kill that snake. It's not out to get you. There is never any justification to ever kill any non-venomous snake in North America, and only in the most unusual and extreme cases should venomous ones be killed. They are vitally important to the ecosystem and only use their venom for 2 reasons: to catch food and to defend themselves. Leave them alone, and they will leave you alone. One of the most hated snakes in the East is the copperhead, and they are the least dangerous of all the venomous snakes. They have very, very mild venom, and they will not kill anybody but under the most unusual circumstances. And so they get persecuted as one of the most deadly ones when that has actually no basis in fact whatsoever. Number 2, first, find non-lethal solutions to animals in your yard that annoy you. Whole books are available dealing how to deal with backyard animals humanely. Death should never be the first option. Number 2, never indirectly cause an animal to die. By buying milk and eggs, cosmetics and toothpastes tested on animals, or animals from a pet store, we allow and fund the suffering and death of animals to continue. When we visit places like circuses and marine parks that exploit and abuse animals, we make it profitable for them to exist. Most animal abuse exists only because it is profitable. When people stop giving money to the abusers, the suffering and death will stop. And don't say that you're only one person and can't have any impact. A vegetarian saves the lives of hundreds of animals by his food choices. As with spreading the gospel, our task is to help save the individual, not to look at the unsaved billions and give up. Number 3, educate others of what is going on. Tell your family and friends what you've learned here. Express how much these things bother you. Vivisection exists only because the majority of people are unaware of what is happening in the labs. Abuse thrives on secrecy. If we would adopt these 3 steps, we would save countless lives. We as individuals can make a difference if we will only make the effort. It is our duty and responsibility as God's caretakers of His creation. As long as we allow and are participate in these practices that hurt animals, we will forever come short to Christ's admonition in Matthew 5:48. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. We cannot have the character of God when we are tainted with such cruelty. We as followers of Christ are to be an example to the world and universe of His law working in His people's lives. When we fulfill the dominion principle, we will have taken one more step toward that goal. Now, in tonight's presentation, I've shown our responsibility to the animals and the ways that which we have mishandled it. I have very much condensed what could have been said, as entire books have been written dealing with every subject I talk about. But I can be summed up further yet into one brief passage by Ellen White. Everything I've talked about tonight is embraced by this one passage found in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 442, talking about the experience of Balaam. Balaam had given evidence of the spirit that controlled him by his treatment of his beast. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Few realize as they should the sinfulness of abusing animals or leaving them to suffer from neglect. He who created man made the lower all animals also, and his tender mercies are over all his works. The animals were created to serve man, but he has no right to cause them pain by harsh treatment or cruel exaction. It is because of man's sin that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth together. Suffering and death were thus entailed, not only upon the human race, but upon the animals. Surely then it becomes man to seek to lighten, rather than instead of increasing, the weight of suffering which his transgression has brought upon God's creatures. He who will abuse animals because he has them in his power is both a coward and a tyrant. A disposition to cause pain, whether to our fellow men or to the brute creation, is satanic. Many do not realize that their cruelty will ever be known, because the poor, dumb animals cannot reveal it. But could the eyes of these men be opened, as were those of Balaam, they would see an angel of God standing as a witness to testify against them in the courts above. A record goes up to heaven, and a day is coming when judgment will be pronounced against those who abuse God's creatures. I can add nothing to that, but to ask that we please allow that day to come soon, for the animals' lives and the vindication of Christ's character are in our hands. Let us remember the words in Isaiah 11, verse 9, "They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain."